Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to answer the question, can your tea go bad? Now before I begin, I highly recommend you check out our past episodes, in particular the playlist on the fundamentals of tea, just in case you're new to tea, new to loose leaf tea. You know the difference between white tea, black tea, gray tea. I just made that tea up, purple tea, fluorescent tea, but just you know the differences between the teas. Now I'll put up here in a banner later in this episode the proper ways to store your tea, because I think that episode is very synchronous with this episode. So in short, can your tea go bad? Well, it depends on what your definition of bad is. So can it get spoiled like bad milk to the point where if you eat it, or remember canned goods when they pop on the top, they have botulism, if you eat them you can go to the hospital and get sick? The answer to that is no. Tea will not make you sick. Tea is dried to dryness, and there's nothing in it that's going to make you sick. Now, can it go bad? Yes, it can go bad in that it can lose its flavor, it can lose its aroma, it can lose its potency. So in that regard, yes, tea can go bad. But the worst way, I would say, to ruin your tea is think of the Boston Tea Party. They pushed that tea, and that was black tea. They pushed that tea into the water. Water will ruin your tea. And I don't mean like hot water before you drink it, but if you just, let's say you have a bag of tea, a pound of tea, whatever, you got tea, and your kids want to just get back at you and like, hey, look, daddy, and they pour water, room temperature water, cold water on dry tea leaves, that tea's ruined, unless you're going to steep that entire pound. Because what happens with water in tea leaves is mold growth, eventually. We talk about here you can re-steep your leaves all the time. But if you have wet tea leaves out for several days, for example, it can lead to mold growth. So we recommend you throw those out. And we do have an episode I'll put up here, hopefully, on what to do with your used tea leaves. So water is the best way to ruin your tea. But in general, your tea can lose its characteristic flavor. And not surprisingly, there is a correlation between oxidization and tea retention of its flavor or its shelf life. So the more oxidized teas can last longer on your shelf, the least oxidized teas can't. So this is a good quiz question if we could play a game like, what are the least oxidized teas, audience? So this is gonna be green tea. So green tea is 0% oxidized. They pluck it and then they kill green it, either by pan frying it or steaming it, depending on if it's Chinese or Japanese green tea. As a whole, green teas have a vibrant shelf life of about 6 months. Now, there are things that you can do to quicken that and prolong that, and we'll talk about that at the end after we go through all the teas. But in general, green tea, as I'm drinking my pu'er right here, gotta drink it before it gets cold. It's about 6 months. Then you look on the other side of the spectrum, the full oxidized ones. Black tea can last 2 years. Oolong, a year to 2 years, because it's oxidized. Pu'er, which I'm drinking right now, a type of dark tea. Pu'er is like wine. The longer it exists, the better it is. We have an episode here on what are tea cakes. So tea cakes are typically dark teas like pu'er. Pu'er is a type of dark tea. There's other dark teas, but pu'er is the most famous. They'll steam them after they've done everything to them to put them into cakes or little like bird's nests. We have an episode on that. And those are like wine. I mean, if you have a tea cake that's been compressed, like a full tea cake, those can last years. Those never get bad. Those are fermented dark teas. They never get bad. So you can have like your I don't know anything about wines, but if you have some 40-year-old wine in the cellar, have your pu'er tea cake next to it, because the longer it exists, the better it's going to get. White tea. White tea is a unique one. I would tell you that white tea, and you'll hear different things about white tea, how long it lasts. And let's be honest, most people aren't drinking white teas. I would say that white teas are one of those that can last a long time as well. I would say they can last a year to 2 years. So really, the ones you got to worry about are green tea. And then I would say with the herbals, again, none of these teas go spoiled. They can just lose their flavor. I would say with the herbals as a whole, they're going to be a little more sensitive, more on like the green tea side, so less than a year, than they would be on the ones like the black teas and the dark teas that can go much further. So that's what I would tell you. So in closing, 6 months for green tea, about a year for oolongs, 2 years for blacks, 2+ to 1,000 years for dark teas, and then I would say herbals or tisanes are going to be about a year. Now, what are some things you can do to prolong your tea? We've talked about in that episode, but really quickly, Airtight containers, dark. Do not let them be exposed to sunlight because that will take away the freshness of tea. And don't put it in humid environments, so don't put it in a refrigerator. Best thing to do is it's almost like leaving it in an attic in the winter. Just cold, like 50, 60 degrees, cold, airtight, in a container that doesn't expose itself to sunlight, and of course no moisture. And your tea can even go beyond the 6 months, the 1 year, and so forth. But just an overall rule of thumb. So when it comes to purchasing teas, I would tell you, like if you're going to purchase a green tea from us, like a Dragon Well, make the attempt to just maybe write on it expiration date so you kind of know when you have to consume it. And if you buy a 3 ounce of Dragon Well, 3 ounces, more or less, it's about 150 steepings or 50 sessions. I mean, you should be able to get through that in 6 months. So, but it is an understand, like when you're buying a dark tea from us, just understand that tea can last a long time. But if you are buying a green tea, you kind of need to remember like, hey, I'm spending my money on these green teas, so I want to make sure that I consume them when they're at their optimal. And so the optimal is going to be before 6 months. Guys, post in the comments. I'd like to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless.